Buenas tardes, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Bienvenidos a nuestro seminario del mes de agosto de la Sociedad Mexicana de Físicos en Medicina. Esta tarde tenemos el gran honor de contar con la presencia del doctor Eric Ford, profesor y director del área de física médica de la Universidad de Washington, quien nos impartirá, debo decírselos en inglés, su plática titulada Improving the Quality of Care Through Incident Learning, a Focus on the Culture of Safety. Si durante la presentación surgen preguntas, por favor les pedimos que nos ayuden compartiéndolas por el chat y al final se las vamos a compartir a nuestro ponente. Pueden hacerlo en inglés o en español, adelante. Y antes de iniciar el seminario me gustaría presentarles la trayectoria académica y profesional del Dr. Ford. A partir de ahora, permítanme, por favor, por atención a nuestro invitado, expresarme hacia ustedes y hacia él en inglés. Dr. Ford is a professor, director, and vice chair of the Medical Physics University of Washington in Seattle, where he oversees the physics service of a department treating approximately 3,000 patients per year at 8 sites of practice. His areas of expertise are quality and safety, development of laboratory technology for experimental radiobiology, and global oncology. He has published over 140 papers, 3 books, and he has been a principal investigator of many federal grants. He's an active member of the AAPM and ASTRO, and currently serves on the ASTRO board of directors. He's a valued mentor to students, residents, and postdocs, and he has been recognized with 5 teaching awards. At home, he and his wife attempt to match the energy and enthusiasm of their 2 twin boys. The Mexican Society of Physicists in Medicine would like to thank you again, Dr. Ford, for your generously sharing your time and your knowledge with us. And with no further ado, here we go. The audience is yours, Dr. Ford. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mariana. And thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor to speak to you all. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, honestly. I'm going to try to share my screen and let's make sure that works. Okay, no, I think Ramiro, maybe you have to reset or something.
You already have the power, Dr. Ford, to share the...
Okay, there we go. Okay, excellent. Okay, good. Can you see this then? Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. All right. So thank you for being here. I look forward to this. I'm going to keep on time. So we're going to end, at least by the end of the hour so that we have time for the questions, the preguntas. And I am very sorry that I can't give you this speech in Spanish, but someday I will come back to you, and that is my dream, to give this to you in Spanish. Okay, so I will. I just give my disclosure. So I have funding is from the National Cancer Institute. My group doesn't receive any vendor funding at present. I do have some leadership roles in APM and ASTRO. I'm on the board of directors at ASTRO, but I want to say that I'm not speaking for APM or ASTRO. Everything you hear is going to be just my opinion, and I'm just a fellow medical physicist. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is to understand the approaches that exist to improving the quality of care in the medical physics context. I'm coming from a therapy background, so a lot of what I'm going to say is informed by that perspective, but I will try to give some examples from imaging and diagnostic imaging as well. At the end, you should be able to appreciate the value of incident learning for improving safety and quality. And then really one of the goals of this time together is that you should come away with this with at least one specific action that you can implement, go back and use in your practice at home. So something very concrete and useful at the end. And I'm going to actually list those as I go through. I'm going to give a little bit of background just about where I'm coming from. I'm, as Mariana said, I'm at University of Washington. It's in Seattle, way up in the corner where it's cool. This is our city. This is our campus down here. Lots of water. Here's the Space Needle. We have a ranking of a good hospital in the U.S. We treat patients in 7 different clinics, 3,000 patients a year. We have SBRT procedures, SRS, intraoperative radiotherapy, brachytherapy. We have a proton therapy facility. And interestingly, which you may not have heard of, we actually have a neutron therapy facility. We're one of the only places in the world that still has a neutron therapy. It was started in the 80s and it's continued now. We treat about 5 patients a day on that machine. It's a cyclotron. In terms of our group, we have 23 faculty and staff in medical physics. We have 4 medical physics residents. And, you know, as you can imagine, we do clinical support, we do research, pretty significant research effort, and we have educational program. We don't have a graduate program though, which I would like us to have a graduate program. Maybe we will in the future. And so that's really kind of the overview of where I'm at, just so you kind of know a little bit about where I'm coming from. Also, this are some pictures of our group. This is our residency director, Christy Hendrickson. These are our 4 current, well, two current and 2 past residents. They're really excellent. And we have 2 per year. And it's a very active group. And this is a little bit of our region, lots of mountains. This is a temperate rainforest where it's actually not tropical, but it's very rainy, lots of water. These are the cherry trees that are on, this is our main campus at the university, and the cherry trees come out every March. It's really amazing. So I feel very grateful to be where I am, and I don't take that for granted, the natural world and the ability to work in the clinic and do, you know, things that help patients. So I'm going to talk to you about these things. I'm going to start by describing what I think is a quality gap in radiation therapy, where we're not doing quite as well as we should for patients, and there are a lot of reasons for that. And then I'm going to talk about what is risk, define risk, and in the sense of risk when something goes wrong, and what informs that and drives it. And then I'm going to talk about the specific tool for reducing risk to improve the quality of care, and that is incident learning, like I said at the beginning. And I'll define what that means and show you in some detail why I think that's very important. Okay, so first, the quality gap. There are some pretty definitive and strong data that we have coming out from cooperative group trials about the quality of care in radiation therapy. And here's one from the RTOG protocol on pancreatic cancer from the 1990s. And what they did is, this is a study published in 2012, where they went back and they looked at those treatments that were done. And they could find some of the treatments that followed protocol and some of the treatments that deviated from protocol, from the radiation therapy part of the protocol. And they found that the ones that deviated from the protocol, these in this group down here, they had a much lower overall survival for patients in that arm. And what's interesting about this is, even though everybody's trying to conform to the protocol, of almost 40% of patients fell into this arm of being not per protocol. So this really points to the fact that we need to do, you know, our part of the care path, the quality of radiation therapy, we need to do that right. And this is one such study, but there have been others that are like this. Here's a summary of this, published by the group at Thomas Jefferson, looking at various cooperative group trials. And you see that in most cases, there is an increased hazard, an increased risk of decreased overall survival when there is some protocol deviation, and it's very significant. So across many different disease sites. So let me show you an example of what this really means in a case study. So this is a 78-year-old man being treated for mesothelioma, okay, the cancer of the lining of the lungs around the outside of the, so you're gonna wanna treat the chest wall for a patient like this to control disease. So one of the ways to do this is to treat a photon field like this, and then you'll see what we're doing here is blocking out the heart with the MLC. This is just a simple AP field, nothing fancy. It's not even IMRT, but it works. And so we're treating this red area. But now what happened in the process of treating this patient and getting ready is that the field was opened up accidentally, because what happened was they're going to treat this middle part over the heart. They're going to treat that with electrons. So when they go to set up the electron field, they put the cone on, the jaws open up, and they sort of, all you have to do is click one button and it captures that field, and then your photon field now looks like the green square instead of the red shape that you're supposed to treat. Okay, so this is a very bad accident waiting to happen. So that's the situation. I'm going to come back and explain this a little more. I'll just tell you, actually, the patient was treated fine. It was not mistreated, but it came very, very close to being mistreated. But I'm going to explain a little bit later how it was prevented, how it was stopped. Okay, so to really understand this, I think we have to understand what risk is and safe in the safety context. So if you haven't read this, I would point you to the task group from the American Association of Physicists in Medicine, task group number 100. This was published in 2016. It's a pretty long report, but I think it's definitely worth reading. It describes what risk is and how to manage it and analyze it. But I can tell you just in a few simple words what I think is the kind of the key point of this report. And that is that risk can be thought of as sort of a combination of factors. One is if something happens, how severe is it? And another is how often does that problem happen? So severity and occurrence, okay? So things that are severe and occur very often are in this high risk quadrant of the matrix. Things that are less severe and don't happen very often are in this lower quadrant. So you want to stay away from the high risk red area. So if you think of this example I showed you, the wrong field open on a mesothelioma treatment, that has a pretty high severity because it's really going to impact the disease course of that patient in a very negative way. The occurrence is not very high. It's maybe in the middle, maybe it's on the low end. It does not happen very often. But when it does happen, it's severe. Okay, so you can take a different example of a different problem scenario, and that might be where, let's say, a treatment plan is not finished on time. Okay, maybe the physician was waiting for some imaging and they didn't get it in time, and so the plan was delayed and the patient didn't start treatment on time. Maybe this occurs more often than the mesothelioma problem I showed you. So its occurrence is high. However, the severity is not very high because maybe you treat the patient 1 or 2 days later and it doesn't affect their treatment. You know, now there are scenarios where it could affect the patient, but let's say on average, it's not very severe. So in the risk sense, then this is a much bigger problem to look at and try to deal with. Okay, so that's the essence of the TG100 risk sort of concept. It's a little more complicated than this. And let me just say one more thing, which is that you also have to look at how detectable the problem is and whether you can prevent it from actually impacting a patient or not. So that's the detectability score. And so what you do is you take these 3 scores and you can multiply them together. You can assign numbers to them. You can say this one severity is maybe a 9, the occurrence is maybe let's say a 5, and the detectability is a 10, and you multiply the numbers together, and that gives you a risk number. And that allows you to define what is high risk in your clinic. So, and also you can appreciate that quality assurance really operates on this dimension of risk, the detectability, to make problems more detectable. So that's why as physicists, we really focus a lot on this with all our QA that we do, measurements, commissioning, and so on. So, so that's sort of kind of risk management, risk perception, risk analysis, risk management. I mean, this is a kind of a funny way to look at it. And, you can see I kind of like, the message I'm saying here is that, what I just showed you is important. You can measure things, but, maybe it's not enough to just put your fingers in your ears. It might actually not help you. So we have to be careful. So I'm gonna kind of show you a little bit of a different tool. I think you can think of these tools in 2 different ways. The risk analysis that I just showed you is something you can do before an incident happens. You can do it anytime. You can do it tomorrow in your clinic. Incident learning is something you do after an incident happens or based on actual events of what happens in your clinic. So they're 2 different approaches and they operate differently. This risk analysis you can do through a method called failure mode and effect analysis. And really it's just a fancy word for what I just showed you about calculating risk. And it's not hard to do, it's very easy. We actually do these many times in our clinic. We do at least two of them every year in our clinic to make sure that we're understanding what risk is in our clinic. And you can do them too, they're not hard. But I think it's something that doesn't naturally happen in the process of clinical care. You have to specifically go out and do that. Whereas incident learning, you can actually do that as part of everything that you do in your daily clinical work. So that's why I'm kind of describing the incident learning as the kind of main focus of this talk. And so kind of talk about this for the rest of the talk. Okay, and I would like to encourage people to put questions in the chat and everything, and we can have discussion at the end. So incident learning is used in many industries, okay? I think it's very widely used in aviation, nuclear power, manufacturing, healthcare as well. What I'm about to show you is definitely not specific to radiation oncology or radiology or anything else. It's used everywhere in healthcare. So we have, this should be a normal part of what we do. It is recommended by many agencies that are relevant for radiation oncology and also radiology. So the IAEA recommends it, WHO recommends it. There are also some national recommendations. I don't know what might be there from Mexico, I'm not sure. But Accreditation Canada, the UK, and several things from the US. In the US, I would say probably one of the most definitive recommendations are from this report from ASTRO called Safety is No Accident. This report is very useful. It has a lot of really good information. But here are some of the recommendations for incident learning. It says that every department should have a review committee that monitors quality problems, and employees should be encouraged to report both errors and near misses. Also, it's folded into practice accreditation. And again, I don't know what the situation is there nationally, but in the US, about half of the practices in the country are accredited. Means that an independent auditing body comes out and studies your practice and gives you an accreditation approval. And there are three different systems in the US that do it. One is the APEX system from Astro. There's another one from ACR, and there's another one from ACRO. Part of practice accreditation is looking at the culture of safety and incident learning. So that's a really important part of that. These are voluntary programs, but they're meant to improve quality. And then on the international front, IAEA has this document called the Basic Safety Standards, International Basic Safety Standards for the use of radiological sources and delivery. And this requires reporting and investigation of medical errors. And they're also encouraging the practice of incident learning more widely. So this is strongly recommended by these, international agencies. So if you engage in this, you are fully aligned with what these international bodies are saying that you should do. Okay, and I'm gonna point this out as a further resource. This is a paper, a review paper in medical physics that Dr. Sue Evans and I published. Dr. Evans is a physician at Yale, and we put this out a couple of years ago. And here's, you can see kind of the scope of this on the right. And it describes many aspects of incident learning. So if you want to learn more of the details, I would point you in this direction for this study. It's not a long paper, it's pretty short and readable, I believe, and has some good information. What is incident learning? I'm going to give you a few examples that I think will help understand it better if you're not so familiar with it. Here's an example report. A wrong vertebral body was treated. Okay, maybe we meant to treat the T12 spine and something happened in the process of care and we ended up treating L5, let's say, or maybe L1, let's say. Okay. And you'd have to dig into that and understand why it happened and understand the root causes. But that is an example of a report that might come in. Another one, wrong CT scan was used for treatment planning. Maybe a patient had two different CT scans. Let's say one was taken with a breath hold and one was taken with just normal free breathing. And the patient was being treated free breathing, but we loaded the breath hold scan in for radiation treatment planning. And so we get a very wrong dose calculation because of that. Wrong MR fusion images loaded for contouring. Maybe the patient had maybe like 3 different MRIs taken at different times. And instead of loading the most current MRI, we loaded one from 3 months ago. And so the visualization of the tumor was wrong because it was a different extent back in the past. And then this is an example of a report that might come in. Somebody might say, I'm putting this report in because I think we have a confusing policy for online imaging being the imaging that's done during the process of radiotherapy. And so that's not really an event. Nothing happened to a patient, but that is the type of report that could come in and should come in so that we can understand how our clinic operates. I wanted to show another example, kind of a little bit outside the context of radiotherapy, although kind of directly related. But this is an example of an incidental finding of COVID infection on imaging. This actually was acquired during the process of somebody getting radiotherapy. You can look it up in this paper. But you'll see here different scans. These are acquired on the treatment device. These are cone-beam CT scans acquired during radiotherapy. So each one is a different day of treatment. You can see day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. And then as you get out here to day 9, what you're seeing is this sort of, glassification, glass-like opacity patterns, which is a classic indicator for an infection like this. And the patient was referred out, and then it turned out that they had COVID. So it can pick up things like this. So this is sort of like in one of the clinics, there was an incident report about this, that somebody said, hey, we've picked up this incidental finding, and that results in potentially a change in the process of care. So maybe it means that the people who are acquiring and viewing these scans, like the radiotherapists or the medical physicists, they maybe are trained to look for this type of finding. And if they see it, maybe they refer it out to the attending physicians for further review. So that's an example of something coming from an incident report. So when a report comes in, here's sort of the overview of how it might be managed. This is a picture from that paper that I told you about. So you have an event that's reported into the incident learning system. There's some management of that. So some triage means, right, you decide what to do with the report. So if it's a major problem, a major event, it might require immediate action. It might require looking into it and get a root cause analysis to understand what really happened. If it's not, maybe it's something more minor. It gets an initial analysis. Maybe somebody looks at it a little bit. Maybe it goes to a quality assurance committee and is reviewed by that committee. Maybe the committee decides that this is a more serious event that requires some further analysis. So maybe it goes to a root cause analysis. Maybe it's a minor event that just gets tracked. In any case, all these events need to be handled in some way and followed up in some way that sort of makes sense. And then some of them might be presented at a meeting in the department. For example, M&M meeting, morbidity and mortality rounds, where you present case studies and try to learn from them. And then based on the handling of this event, there should be an action plan with feedback to either to reporters or to groups within the department. Like, for example, that COVID lung study I showed, maybe the action plan is to set up a training session for the therapist where they learn how to, interpret images for lung patients. Maybe that's an action that came out of that. So overall, the goal is to manage a situation like this. I want to thank Nuria Jornet for this. This is a cartoon that I think summarizes this really well. You can see that there's a problem here, okay? This string is about to break. It's holding this box. These guys are standing under it. It falls, but it doesn't hit them. And so they're okay, okay? So this is an unsafe condition. That's what we call this. It's something that's about to, like a weakness in this chain here. This is an unsafe behavior, standing under the box. And then the end result here is a near miss. It's something that could have really hurt them, but it didn't. Just kind of by accident, it happened to not hurt them. But it could have been much worse. It could have been an accident. So one of the key concepts with incident learning is that we want to follow everything that happens in a clinic, okay? And we spend a lot of time studying these near miss type events like this one, because these help us understand the unsafe conditions really well. And they help us prevent the accidents like this. Is if we understand all these near misses, we can avoid having the accident. That's the concept. And so I hope that makes sense. Another way to visualize that is this pyramid that's kind of dates back to the 1930s. But the idea is that for every major accident you also have many more situations where you have minor injury, or you have even more situations where there's a near miss or a bad practice or a unsafe behavior. So the vast majority of incidents, they're not major accidents, but they're more in this category of just something minor, but we still want to study them. So that's what we do. So this is, you might kind of want to remember this acronym and this graphic is because it's kind of, you see it a lot in safety type literature, but the idea is you have a plan for what you're going to do, you do it, and you study it, and then you act on it. So this is called the PDSA cycle: plan, do, study, act. And this is really what you're doing in incident learning. You're studying what goes on, you're acting on it, you make a plan based on that, you do that plan, you study it again, and you kind of keep repeating this cycle. And that's a key method for improving the safety of your quality of care. So let me come back to my example then. So I told you this field was open accidentally. And then the follow-up was that this was caught by a computer interlock. So what happened was, this was in Mosaic. Mosaic is the electronic health record that we use that controls all these fields. As many of you know, that's one of the major vendor solutions that we have in radiotherapy. So it was in Mosaic, these fields were opened up to the green. And then what happened was that caused an interlock on the field, which told the therapist to do the treatment. It told them, look, you cannot treat because something has changed about that field. Okay, so the interesting thing about this though, is that when the system was first installed, that computer interlock was not on, because it's an option to turn that interlock on or off. It was configured to be off. But through this process of incident learning, through this cycle of studying what happens, what was found was that there were other situations before this person came in for treatment, other situations where there were problems with fields being changed. And so as a result of that incident learning process, this interlock was turned on. And then when this patient came for treatment, this problem happened, the interlock was on, it was caught, it was fixed, no problem. But if there hadn't been this process of incident learning and study and everything, then this patient would have been mistreated and it would have really been harmful for him. So yeah, your success of this is really going to depend a lot though on how you do it and what in practice happens within your clinic. Okay, and one way to look at whether you're doing it successfully is how many reports you get in. So here I'm showing a graphic from different hospitals, and these are all data that were published in papers. And I just pulled out the number of reports, number of incident reports that went in that hospital per patient treated. And what you see is that at these different clinics, there is widely variable numbers of reports that come in. Okay, some clinics there are almost no reports, very few per patient. In some clinics, it almost reaches 1 report per patient, which is very high. Okay, so that you could actually say, oh, sorry, this is a typo. Our goal, not our goal, our goal is more than 1 safety report per patient, or at least 1 safety report per patient. And that is a good thing. So that concept is very counterintuitive, because you would think, why would you want to have more reports from your clinic? That seems bad. That means like that you're doing a bad job, that you're not, your quality is not good. Why do you have all these safety reports? Okay, but I'm arguing that it's good. It means if you get more reports in, it's good, because it means you're studying your process and you're learning from it and you're improving things. So there's actually data on that. Okay, this is not just my opinion. Okay, there's a hard data on this, and I'm going to show you some of that. So this is from a survey from the AHRQ, which stands for the Agency on Healthcare Research and Quality, which is a system in the US to study quality in hospitals. So every year they publish this thing called the Hospital Safety Outpatient Survey. Okay, and that's what you see on the x-axis, it's a survey of people's attitudes in the hospital about safety. There are hundreds of thousands of reports that come in, or surveys that go out to people across the country. So it's a huge database. And then for each hospital, they compare this to the patient safety indicator composite on the y-axis. That's a measure of some indicator of how safe that hospital is. So it looks at like post-operative infections. It looks at like adverse drug events, and I think it's acuity corrected. So it's a good indicator of how well they're doing safety wise. And what you see here is that there's a strong correlation. If you look at it, what you see is the number of reports is anti-correlated with the number of patient safety incidents. So in other words, if you have more reports, you have fewer patient safety incidents, okay, which is exactly what I just said. And it's counterintuitive. It really doesn't make sense. It's a paradox. But if you think about it a little more deeply, it does make sense. And it all comes back to this, right? Because you're studying this type of situation so that you prevent this type of situation. Okay, so these are probably the most important things I had to say, honestly, to you. I'm going to show you a little bit more data and things. We have like maybe 20 more minutes, but these are the key concepts. I just want to maybe pause for a minute and see if Ramiro or Mariana, if there's any like important questions that you want to talk about now, or should we wait till the end?
We can wait till the end, Dr. Ford.
Yes, please, to the end.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to show you some data these are data from our clinic, where we see the number of reports and over time. We started here. We started the incident learning system here. There weren't very many reports at all, so we started almost at zero. This was back in 2012. And what happened is that you see that it ramps up over time. It went up pretty steadily over time. And then after this time, after a couple of years, it stayed pretty steady over time. This is just in one particular clinic, the one where about half the patients in our system are treated at this clinic, but we get 25 reports per week. Okay, so it's a pretty large volume of data coming through. We meet every week, we talk about all these reports, we analyze them, we look for trends, we look at quality improvement that we can do to try to prevent issues from happening again. So it's a very rigorous process. I think this shows another way of looking at engagement. It's somewhat variable. So this is just looking at different physicists. So these are 13 different physicists, and it's saying how many of all the reports from all physicists, how many were put in by that person. So you can see that physicist number one is putting in a lot of reports, but then there's some physicists who don't put in any reports. So 85% of reports come from these three people, and 8 people have submitted less than 8 reports in 2 years. This data is a little bit old, but basically this shows that, we have some work to do. An ideal situation would be, probably like everybody is more or less equal. Everybody's giving the same number of reports, and it's a large number of reports. So, I think we also have work to do in our clinic. Our engagement is not exactly fully there for everybody who's working in the clinic. So here I promised you that I would have specific actions that you could take home and use in your clinic. So here's my suggestion number 1, okay, is set up an incident learning system if you don't have it, okay? I think there's 2 points I want to make about that. So one is, it's best if this is within your own clinical group. So within your radiation oncology department, or if you're in radiology, within your radiology group, because if it's not within your clinical group, it can be of less value. So some people will participate in a hospital incident learning system, where you're in with all the other specialties in the hospital. You're in with surgery and interventional radiology and whatever else. And while that's valuable, it doesn't help you within your team talk about clinical issues that happen in the clinical unit, which is really where the learning needs to happen. So it needs to be something within your clinical group. Okay. And the other thing is I want to make this point is that this is very low cost or potentially no cost, because it could literally be as simple as a piece of paper that you ask people to fill out. Yeah, that was my point, is that this can be very low cost or no cost, and it could be even just like a paper system, and you can get a lot of value from it. Yeah, okay. So the thing that really makes this work is having a good safety culture. And so what do I mean by safety culture? So this is the definition: the shared commitment of leadership, the management, and the employees to ensure that the safety of the work environment. So that means for staff and for patients. So that we're all working together and we're all aligned about this. So I'm going to show you kind of what this means. I think there's a really helpful resource from the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. Here's the link, and you can download this. I'm not sure if I can copy this into the chat, so I guess I can't, but you can download this book, and it's really useful. I think this handbook is very, very easy to read. They talk about 10 different traits of safety culture: the responsibility of the individual, the questioning attitude, effective communication, leadership, decision-making, respectful work environment, continuous learning, problem identification, an environment for raising concerns, and the processes around how people work. Okay, so a lot of this you can see is kind of related to incident learning in a way, like questioning attitude, leadership responsibility in terms of like promoting and making sure this is set up, continuous learning, problem solving, raising concerns. Those are all related to incident learning. And we've seen that in our own clinic. So I want to kind of like give you an example of two different clinics. So say you have clinic A, and in that clinic, only serious events are reported into that system, and it's a hospital-wide system, and you're only seeing about 10 events per year. So imagine yourself in that clinic and how that feels in terms of the safety and quality improvement. Then imagine another clinic where you have a system set up like we talked about. Almost all the staff are participating. Maybe it's an electronic system, it's within that clinic itself, and maybe you get 10 or more reports per week. So imagine those two clinics and how that would seem to work in those two. And I think you can imagine that the safety culture, just how empowered you feel to bring up problems and talk about them, that feels very different in these two different clinics, right? So I want to show you some data on this. So we studied this in our own clinic, and this was from one of our residents who published this now it's 7 years ago. But he asked people questions in a survey. He did a survey of everybody in the clinic. And he asked, these are validated questions. In this unit, we discuss ways of preventing errors from happening again. And when it started out in 2012, the rates were not very good. Only 60-some% of people said agreed with this statement. But then, as we started doing incident learning and engaging in this process, the rate went up, and it stayed up for the next year. And this was a very significant increase. And he asked a number of questions like this. Here's another one. After we make changes to improve the safety, we evaluate their effectiveness. Again, it started out low, but then it went up. And I have confidence that my reports get used to improve our system of care. Started low and it went up. And so all of the questions that he looked at, they either got significantly better like this, or they at least stayed the same. And so that was pretty important observation. He published this paper. Here's the reference that you can go and read more about it if you want to. This is another way of looking at that, which is how staff are engaged. So in this system, and this is from our clinic, that the therapists and the dosimetrists and the physicists, they're all engaged in this. They're all reporting into it. Also here, what happened over time. This is the number of unique users, unique people that are reporting in. Okay, and you can see that over time that grows to the point where in this given month you had 25 people using the system. So that's another way of seeing whether you're doing a good job with incident learning. And then a few years later, we had another resident, Per Hartfixen, who redid that survey that I just told you about. So, you know, we had seen some improvements in 2 years, but we wanted to see if we did the survey after 5 years, what happens? Because we want to know whether that change is sustainable or not. And you can see by the title that it is, but let me show you some of the data. So here's what happened. We asked the questions about communication and concern about being punished. If you put a report in, are you going to be punished for it? And at first, the answer was more mixed. Some people had, a negative view of it, and some people had a positive view, and some people were in the middle. So it was more of a mixed review. But then over time, it got much more of a sort of an agreement that it is a good environment. The punitive concerns are not a concern. Okay, and here's their data from this extended survey, and you see that over time it stays up. Okay, so this is 5 years of data, and you can see that that change that we saw in the first year is pretty sustainable. It's very significant change. And again, like the previous study, he asked different questions about safety culture. He asked about teamwork, that also went up and it stayed high. He asked about people's perception. What is your perception about patient safety? At the beginning, it was kind of mixed, and over time, it went up. More people saying they had a positive perception. And then this one finally is about feedback. When you put a report in, do you get information out, and is it useful? And again, it's starting to be mixed, but then over time it got an improvement. And this graph, I think, shows that there still is room for improvement with feedback. It's sort of split. Half the people roughly have a positive view, half the people have maybe a neutral to negative view of it. Okay, so there's still some improvement that needs to happen on these things. So this is, again, coming back to specific actions that you can take. So I talked about set up an instant learning system. So you could work on that. Maybe you've already done that. Maybe you have that in your clinic. So if you do have that, one thing I would say is, okay, well, then the next step is try to measure the number of reports you have and try to increase that. See how high you can get it, because more is better. And also measure your safety culture. I showed you these surveys that you can use to measure them. You could do that too. And you might say, well, that's a little difficult to do. I don't have that survey. How do I do it? So I will point you to this particular resource. This is from the AAPM, the Safety Profile Assessment. It's really geared towards radiotherapy, but some of it may be more generally useful. It's got 92 questions and 4 topic areas that are around institutional culture, quality management, innovation, and then some performance indicators of how your clinic is kind of conforming to like the baseline best practice expectations. So if you log into this website, you don't have to be an AAPM member. Anybody can log on here. You can go on there, you can take the survey, it takes about an hour or so to do, and then you get a score back, and it compares you to other clinics, and it's in the database, and you can see how you compare, and you'll get a measure of your culture. It's better if you do this as a team and you get your team together and take the survey. So that's, again, one of these sort of practical takeaway things. You can do a measurement with a survey like this, and then you could come back in a year and remeasure it and see if you've improved. So in conclusion then, so quality improvement is really one of the key things, is this process of just watching and learning, seeing what happens in your practice and learning from it. And there's really no better way. It promotes quality, but also I want to say that it does promote education. It helps people learn better what they're doing, what their practices are. It promotes teamwork. People are talking to each other and solving problems, and it promotes better morale. And people usually like, this is an interesting and rewarding process to be involved in, and people usually value it a lot. And then the existing tools that are out there, they're simple and they're low cost. So just in the last couple of minutes before we go to questions, I just want to share a couple things about a little bit more broadly what's happening. So I told you basically everything I've kind of talked about is what happens within a particular hospital or a particular clinic. But then, you know, you have many different clinics operating, maybe in your region or even in the country. So how do we learn from each other? How can we have a shared learning system? And there are bits and pieces of this now emerging. I'll show you what is in place in the US. In 2014, this system was launched. It's called the Royal System, Radiation Oncology Incident Learning System. It's sponsored by the 2 major professional societies. And the mission is to facilitate safer, higher quality care in radiation oncology by providing a mechanism for shared learning in a secure and non-punitive environment. And here's the website. You can go there and there's lots of really interesting and useful information. And that is publicly open access. Unfortunately, to sign up for the system, you have to be a practice in the US because it's protected by US federal laws. But you know, this website is open to everybody. And so if you go on the website, you can see here's a series of case studies about different sorts of problems that have happened in adaptive planning, SRS, insufficient imaging, prior spinal radiation missed, and so on. And then there's also older quarterly reports dating back to 2014 about different topics like HDR or patient identification or handoffs. So there's a huge wealth of information here on this, from this data, and there's thousands and thousands of reports in the system now. And then also the IAEA runs a system which is called SAFRON, which stands for Safety in Radiation Oncology. And again, this is shared learning. I believe it has about several hundred clinics kind of participating in it. And it's also has reports where you can download information, and also has a wealth of data. You can actually go into Saffron and you can look at it yourself. So you can look at the incidents reports themselves, the raw data that's been anonymized and filtered. So that's sometimes a useful learning opportunity too. So there are resources out there for further learning, and you know, because this is a really interesting and complex area of study. And with that, I'd like to thank you. It's really an honor to come here and speak to you all. Thanks very much. So I am free for as much time as you want to do questions for.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ford. I was trying to reach a few questions. We have a few of them. Could you please mention the most common cause of major incidents in a radiotherapy department? That's one of our questions.
Yeah, sure. That's a good one. Okay, so the studies that are out there have shown that the treatment planning process is the area where most errors happen. And so it's usually something that happens in treatment planning. I mean, it's not like 90% of errors, but it's, you know, it's probably a majority of errors. And then, but to drill down more specifically to what happens, it's almost never a computer failure or a software error or a bug. Although I think sometimes people focus on that. If you've read, you know, some of the literature in radiation oncology, some of the really bad accidents that happen, like the Theratron from the 1980s, or the Sagittaire accident in Spain, or the Epinal accident in France. A lot of those are machine errors. like that have to do with like the treatment planning system crashing or something like that, or the machine being miscalibrated. That type of error is very rare actually when you look at it. So usually the type of errors that happen have to do more with like people and their just different problems that come up, like miscommunication between people, or wrong information, wrong scans loaded, wrong lesions contoured, wrong understanding, wrong dose. Maybe like a physician tells somebody a dose and they hear a different number than that physician actually wanted to treat. So there are more of these kind of like handoff type problems. Those are the most common things that you see. But it's not really one specific thing. That's why it's so hard to solve, because it takes so many forms.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from the audience. What kind of resources does the radiation center should have in order to implement the incident learning risk tool?
Okay, yeah. So I think it can take many different forms. So the simplest form in terms of resources, the simplest version of this is that you need somebody to commit a little bit of time to it. So that would be the resource, is really the person's time. So maybe that's, let's say, a physicist and maybe let's say a therapist manager, let's say, working together, and maybe they agree to each spend a couple hours a week on this process. And so that's the resource that they need, is time. And then what do they need in terms of other resources is if they could have an electronic system, that's really helpful. So, and it might be something simple like even just like a shared network drive where they can put data that's secure. You want to make sure the data is secure, but like where people can put reports into that system. So maybe that's a resource, is maybe the IT sort of services has to allow for that. If that doesn't work, an even simpler thing would just be to have paper forms, which I've seen people use, and it's a very effective way to do that. You want to put a report in, you write down on a form, and that's in somebody's office, and you collect those and deal with them. It's just a little maybe more inconvenient than the electronic resource, but that's very like low requirements in terms of resources. It's just a piece of paper. And then yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Okay, yes, I believe it does.
Yeah.
We have one more question. In a center that has a large number of patients per day and the time between simulation and delivery of the dose is short, is it easier to make, is it easier to incidents or accidents occur during delivery time of treatment due to this workload?
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay, we and a couple of other groups have tried to study this. So what you might imagine is that you're doing a lot of patients, it's very quick, and the time is compressed, and so it's going to be easier to make a mistake. That's what I would expect, just like intuitively. What we actually found when we studied this, though, is that it's the opposite. Is that the plans where there's less time and it's more compressed, we actually see fewer errors and problems and near misses from. And I don't have a good explanation for that, but I think part of it is that when the whole team knows that there's sort of an urgency to it, a lot of times the communications are better. If you have like maybe 2 weeks to make a plan, there's less focus. People sort of don't communicate as well in that environment. That's just sort of my own estimate of why, but I think it's actually that's what we've seen so far, is that it's actually like not as big of a problem as you would think. But having said that, that's just the experience from one clinic, and I'm not sure if that's going to be generally true everywhere. So this is why it's important for you, whoever asked this, everybody, to study their own like clinical process, because it could be different where you are. It could be that it's much like worse for these compressed time plans.
Oh, yes, interesting. Yeah, we have one more question. It says, is there any department or area that can make more mistakes than others, or do you find it relatively equally the frequency of occurrence of mistakes?
Well, let's see. I guess I would go back to what I said before about treatment planning being a big risk point. So whatever happens in treatment planning, the dosimetrists and the physicists in there, there seems to be more mistakes there. And it's not because, I don't think it's because the people are, not doing a good job or not trying or sloppy, whatever. It's a very complex part of the workflow, and there's lots of things that happen, and there's lots of room for miscommunication and technical errors. And so that's an area to really pay attention to. Also, I think another area where you see problems happen more often is not when it's so much within a particular group, but when the information is passed off between groups. So when you have a referring physician referring a patient in, that handoff problems can happen. Or when you have a patient who is starting radiation, and they're supposed to have the radiation happen exactly concurrently with chemotherapy, that communication can sometimes be a problem. So it's when you have people transferring information or having to communicate with each other that often problems happen. And I don't think beyond that you can generalize too much, because like I said, every clinic is going to be different. But we do watch what's happening, and sometimes you'll see problems where you have maybe even one person even making a lot of mistakes, and then you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do about that? The best thing is to think about it as a system, and the first reaction shouldn't be that this person is doing a bad job, and we need to punish them. So that's usually not very helpful, because usually most people are actually trying to do a good job, and if they're making mistakes, there's usually like an underlying reason for that. Maybe they're really struggling with the computer system or other things. It could be so many different things. So the first thing is to have, and this is really what about safety culture and just culture is really about this, is that you have to look at how the person is operating and assume that they're trying to do a good job as your first assumption. And then try to figure it out and talk to them and try to make it better. If it still keeps happening and there's still problems and there's still errors, then you have to think of like corrective actions and things like, maybe this person needs to have like all their plans reviewed by somebody or something like that, because you have to put the patient safety first. So it can be a really complicated thing to walk through. I'm not sure if that's what this person was asking about in the question, but that's another thing that I've seen.
Yes, okay. It says yes, thanks.
Okay, great.
Maybe we have time for one more or two questions. It says, let me try to translate it for you. how close to 0% of error can we get? Is it possible to approach to zero, or it says only machines, or related to human performance? Is it possible?
That is a great question. That is a really good question. Okay, so I think that it is possible to reduce the severe errors, like the really accidents and things that are going to really have a negative impact on patients. I think it's possible to bring that down to, like almost 0%. But the thing is, you're always going to see problems come up in the clinic, no matter what, no matter how good you get. There's always going to be, that box that I showed over the guy's head. There's always some unsafe condition that can cause you trouble. And that's true even in they call high reliability organizations like aviation, nuclear power. There's almost never accidents in aviation or nuclear power. You can go on millions of plane flights and there will be not an accident, right? It's very, very reliable. But every day there are many, many near misses that happen in aviation, even now. And they have a system for reporting these in many systems across the globe. But it continues to happen. So we have to be observant, and we have to keep watching these things. And I think the more we watch, the more you look and the more you study these near misses thing, you can get that rate of big problems, you can get it down really, really low. So you don't have, whatever the equivalent of an airplane crash, you don't have that in the therapy department. Like, we can be really good at avoiding those.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, maybe from me, if I may.
Yeah.
Regarding the just and safety culture you mentioned, can you share with us your thoughts about this index to authority range?
Yeah.
In terms of incidents or near misses happening when we are like too afraid to speak up just because of the authority index.
Yeah. It's that's a great question. That's probably one of the things that is a big driver of this. So hopefully everybody knows what Mariana is talking about. If there's somebody in a position of power, okay, and there's somebody in a position of less power, it can be, or authority, it can be very difficult for the person in the position of less authority to speak up and raise a problem and to ask about something that they don't want to ask about. And it happens all the time. And so an example of this is in the airline industry. People have seen that when pilots, you kind of have different ways of operating. So one pilot can insist on being called by their formal title, whatever, you have to call this person Mr. Pilot, whoever, and they're very formal, and they don't talk to the rest of the staff, and they close the cabin door. And then there's another system where the pilots insist on being called by their first name. You're going to call me Eric, and I don't use my last name. We talk before the flight. Maybe we have a cup of coffee, and then we fly. So those flights where there's that lower power index of authority gap, they're safer. They're much safer than the ones where you have the bigger gap. And so how do you get there, I guess, is maybe part of your question, right? How do you reduce the gap? Because we know it's bad. We know it's for sure it's bad. It's going to impact safety. And so I don't have any one, exactly easy answer for it. I think there's many answers to it. I do think that the process of incident learning is a really good way to approach this. And especially if you can get some of the key authority figures invested in this, So so they're part of it, you know. So one example might be, okay, you have maybe a weekly or a monthly meeting where it's not just, you know, the person in the low authority index position. It's not just like, let's say, usually it might be like, let's say, the nurse or the therapist, but it's everybody. And also it's, you know, the physician, the medical director, okay, the people who have the high authority roles in the clinic, that they're there also, and they you know, participate. And so you have to think about, okay, how can we get them involved? Can we get them to come to this meeting? You know, and you have to work on that. You know, there are lots of ways to do that. There are these international recommendations that you can suggest. There are, if you do case studies of events, sometimes people will get interested in those. They're quite interested to learn about them and understand them. You can give out awards. Like an example is, in our clinic, we give out the Good Catch Award every month. So that's like an award for somebody who found the best near miss, okay? And you could have your medical director give out that award. And then the medical director is saying, look, I really value you putting in that report and making our patients safer. Or you can make like a mission statement. You could have the person in the high authority figure, let's say the senior physician, they could write a mission statement about like patient safety. This is our commitment to patient safety. You know, like they're gonna have a hard time not to say anything against patient safety, right? I mean, why would it? That's not what anybody is about. They may have different attitudes about it, but they're not going to disagree with the idea of having a safe clinical operation, right? It doesn't. So, you know, getting them to write a statement about it, you know, put it on the wall. I don't know. Those are just some ideas, you know.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
Well,
yeah.
I believe we've reached time. And right now, I would like to thank you. Thank you very, very much for your time, the attention,
sure.
and the knowledge you've shared with us. And now let me say something in Spanish.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Olinka, ¿me ayudas? Muchas gracias. Antes de cerrar, les queremos compartir el invitado de nuestro próximo seminario. Es el doctor Carmel Caruana de la Universidad de Malta, y nos va a acompañar con el título Medical Physics Leadership, Raising Our Profile Within and Outside Healthcare. Será por ocasión de septiembre, el tercer jueves es feriado, lo proponemos para el 23 de septiembre. Por favor, ayúdenos a recordar, será a las 12 horas, tiempo de la Ciudad de México. Él nos estará acompañando con un horario europeo, entonces nos pidió que hiciéramos un ajuste para que fuera un poco más sencillo para él. Él está especializado en radiología diagnóstica y terapéutica, en protección radiológica y en dispositivos de uso médico, y se involucra en la legislación de temas de profesionalización, educación y entrenamiento de físicos médicos. Fue el presidente de la Comisión de Educación y Entrenamiento de la Federación Europea de Organizaciones de Física Médica, y lo pueden buscar una amplia contribución en la literatura en términos, en temas de liderazgo y de reconocimiento de la física médica. Entonces, los invitamos a que nos acompañen. Muchas gracias a todos por su atención. Dr. Ford, thank you very much. You are also invited to join us September 23rd to our next speaker. So this is it for today. Ramiro, ¿algún comentario para despedirnos? Gracias a todos.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ford, for this interesting talk. And I think this seminar encourages us, give us motivation to implement this kind of system in our facilities, because this is very helpful for the patients mainly, and for medical physicists, for dosimetries, for everyone is very important.
Yeah, thanks, Ramiro. Thanks, Mariana. It's very nice to be here with you.
Nice to meet you too, doctor.
Mexican Society of Medical Physicists say thank you. If there is no more comment, ¿alguien más? ¿Algún comentario para el doctor? Tenemos un minutito antes de cerrar.
Dr. Ford share to us in the chat his email. So everyone, if everyone has another question, so feel free to contact him, right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, please reach out if you. I'm happy to respond. I'm happy to do that. Okay, take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Have a good evening.
Nos vemos en septiembre. Gracias.